They say a child can't choose their parents, but a mother can, and sometimes that choice changes everything. In this case, a convicted predator with a dark past was welcomed into a family as a father figure. He was given a second chance at a normal life, but on the very day he was supposed to appear in court for a serious offense, he vanished. When authorities arrived at his home, they found something far worse than an absent defendant. 7 bodies, all shot execution style, 2 showing clear signs of sexual assault. How could this happen? How did a man with such a disturbing past slip through the cracks and end up at the center of a tragedy? By the end of this story, you'll have to decide for yourself. But be warned, this is a case you won't forget. A picture-perfect family, or so it seemed. This story takes us to the quiet town of Brookhaven, Missouri, a peaceful community where people rarely lock their doors at night. At the center of this tragedy was Stephanie Caldwell, a 35-year-old mother of 3 teenagers who was well-known and well-liked in town. She had 2 daughters, Madison Hale, 13, Rachel Caldwell, 17, and 1 son, Nathan Caldwell, 15. Each child had a different biological father, but they were raised as siblings. They had a close-knit bond and relied on their mother for everything. But the real father figure in their lives was not Stephanie's husband. It was Paul Monroe, Madison's biological father. Paul and Stephanie had been married for 13 years before their divorce, but he had never abandoned his role in the children's lives. Even though Rachel and Nathan weren't biologically his, he treated them like his own. He was their rock, always there for school events, birthdays, and every small moment that mattered. He had even petitioned for adoption to become Nathan and Rachel's legal father. But then, everything changed. On June 15, 2021, Stephanie remarried. Her new husband? A man named Derek Lawson. And that decision, whether made in love, trust, or ignorance, would prove to be fatal. Who was Derek Lawson? From the outside, Derek seemed like an ordinary man trying to rebuild his life. He had a steady job at a local construction company, attended church with Stephanie, and even played stepfather to her 3 children. But beneath the surface, he carried a past that should have set off every alarm. Derek was born in Kansas and had a troubled childhood, often getting into fights, theft, and underage drinking. By the time he was 20, he had already been arrested twice for petty crimes. But in 2004, he crossed a far more dangerous line. At just 21 years old, Derek was convicted of kidnapping and assaulting a 16-year-old girl at knife point. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, a sentence that should have kept him behind bars for most of his adult life. But somehow, that didn't happen. How did a convicted predator get out? Derek was supposed to serve at least 85% of his sentence before being eligible for parole. However, over the years, he gamed the system, receiving positive evaluations for good behavior, work assignments, and participation in education programs. He managed to convince the parole board that he had changed, despite multiple warnings, including reports that he had been caught using a contraband cell phone in prison to send explicit messages to underage girls. He was released in November 2019. Not long after, he was required to register as a sex offender, meaning he should have been closely monitored by authorities. But here's where it gets terrifying. Once out, Derek failed to check in regularly with the sheriff's office, violating the terms of his parole. He avoided compliance checks, and despite clear red flags, nothing was done. Then, he met Stephanie Caldwell. Within a year, they were married, and less than 2 years later, the bodies were found. A tragedy that could have been prevented. By the time the authorities uncovered Derek's true nature, it was already too late. The question remains, did Stephanie know? Did she ignore the warnings? Or was she completely in the dark? Even more disturbingly, Stephanie's mother, Margaret Hale, had already started digging into Derek's past just months before the tragedy. What she found horrified her. But before she could do anything about it, her worst fears became reality. What happened next is nothing short of a nightmare. For many families, the last weekend of April was just another ordinary time for relaxation and fun. But for Stephanie Caldwell's children and their friends, it was the beginning of a nightmare that no one saw coming. Derek Lawson, the convicted predator who had married Stephanie, was still under investigation for inappropriate online interactions with a teenage girl. He was scheduled to appear in court on May 1st, 2023, a trial that had been postponed for years. During those delays, Derek built a life with Stephanie, living as a husband, stepfather, and trusted figure in their small town. It was this delay that gave him the opportunity to hide in plain sight. But by the time authorities realized the danger, it was too late. The rules that were meant to keep them safe. Stephanie's ex-husband, Paul Monroe, had always been protective of the kids. He had one rule. Anyone around the children had to pass a background check. Stephanie assured him that Derek's record was clean. But was she lying, or did she genuinely not know? The truth remains a mystery. What we do know is that in April 2023, as Derek's delayed trial finally approached, he carefully orchestrated what seemed like an ordinary weekend for the teenagers in his home. By Saturday, Rachel Caldwell, Stephanie's 17-year-old daughter, had invited two of her closest friends, Emily Weber, 16, and Brooke Reynolds, 15, over for a sleepover. The girls were excited. The plan was simple. Go shopping at the local mall. Spend the evening at Main Street Arcade, a popular entertainment center. Return home for a fun night together. It was the kind of carefree weekend every teenager looks forward to. But the next morning, everything took a terrifying turn. When the text stopped coming, Rachel's mother, Stephanie, had no idea that this would be the last morning she would ever see her daughter alive. Rachel had always been good about checking in, so when she suddenly stopped responding to texts, her mother felt uneasy. Emily's mom, Ashley Weber, had been in contact with her daughter through Snapchat the night before. Everything seemed normal until Emily sent a final message early Sunday morning. Then, silence. By Monday morning, things became even more alarming. None of the three girls, Rachel, Emily, or Brooke, showed up at school. Rachel's younger brother, Nathan, and sister, Madison, were also missing. The school bus drove past their homes, but not a single one of them came out. The parents immediately contacted authorities to report them missing. Meanwhile, Derek Lawson was also missing. On the very morning he was supposed to stand trial, he never appeared in court. Police rushed to his home. They knocked on the door, but no one answered. For hours, they waited outside, trying to obtain a search warrant. But nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to find. A house of horror. When officers finally entered Derek Lawson's property, the scene was worse than anything they had imagined. 7 bodies, scattered across the sprawling land, hidden among trees and brush. All shot execution style with a 9mm handgun. The victims included Stephanie Caldwell, 35, shot 3 times in the head. Rachel Caldwell, 17, found near the woods. Nathan Caldwell, 15, found in the basement. Madison Hale, 13, found beside her mother. Emily Weber, 16, and Brooke Reynolds, 15, found together, far from the house. Derek Lawson, 41, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Some victims appeared to have been assaulted before being killed. The placement of the bodies suggested something chilling. They were not killed in the same place. Had they tried to run? Were they lured outside before being executed? The horrifying details only deepened the mystery. The final messages, a killer's last words. The night before the murders, Derek Lawson sent a series of disturbing text messages. Messages that would only make sense after the tragedy unfolded. One of them was sent to the very girl involved in his court case. In a bizarre and chilling tone, he wrote, "I did everything they wanted, and it wasn't enough. They'll regret this. They don't know the real story. Now they never will." Authorities believe Derek planned this massacre as a final act of control. By killing his wife, stepchildren, and their friends, he ensured that no one would be left to testify against him. But that wasn't the most horrifying part. Derek had planned this. He had been buying ammunition, planning the location of the killings, and studying law enforcement response times for weeks. This was not a crime of passion. It was a calculated execution. The mystery deepens. Why did Stephanie trust Derek despite his past? Were there signs she ignored? Could this tragedy have been prevented? One thing is certain. This wasn't just a murder. It was a deliberate extermination of an entire family. It's easy to look back and wonder, how did no one see this coming? But the truth is, the red flags were there. They were just ignored, dismissed, or buried beneath a carefully crafted facade. As investigators pieced together the events leading up to the Brookhaven Massacre, chilling new details began to emerge. Messages, warnings, and desperate pleas that had all gone unheard. A desperate message that no one took seriously. On April 30th, 2023, just one day before the brutal murders, Derek Lawson sent a Facebook message request to a young woman named Jessica Parks, someone from his past who never wanted to hear from him again. The message, sent around 8 p.m., was filled with anger, resentment, and blame. "I did everything I promised. I got a great job. I made good money. I was building a new life, just like I said I would. And because of you, it's all gone. This is on you." Jessica, at first, didn't think much of it. Maybe he had lost his job. Maybe he was going through a rough time. But something felt off. Then another message came. "I told you. I wasn't going back." At that moment, Jessica realized exactly what he was talking about. Derek was supposed to be in court the next day for his trial involving an underage girl. By messaging her, he was violating the terms of his parole. He no longer cared about the rules. And that was terrifying. Jessica took a screenshot of the messages and sent them to the Brookhaven County District Attorney's office, just in case. At the time, she had no idea that she was looking at the final words of a man about to commit a massacre. The trial that never happened. The next morning, Jessica got a call from the prosecutor. The trial had been delayed again. Derek's lawyer had requested more time, citing an issue with his client's phone records. Jessica was furious. She had waited for years for justice. She had done everything right, reported him, testified, and followed every legal step. And yet somehow he was still free. Then, just 30 minutes later, the prosecutor called again. This time, the news was far worse. Derek wasn't just missing. He had disappeared, along with 5 teenagers. At that moment, Jessica felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. Where was he? What was he planning? Terrified, she packed a bag, booked an Airbnb 45 minutes away, and went into hiding, praying she wouldn't be next. A survivor's warning that was ignored. Jessica wasn't the only one who had tried to warn people about Derek Lawson. Crystal Shaw, one of Derek's earliest victims, had been fighting for years to keep him behind bars. She knew what he was capable of. She had felt his violence firsthand, and when she heard about the murders, she collapsed because she had begged the legal system not to release him. Years earlier, when she was 16 years old, Crystal had been at a party in Brookhaven when she made the mistake of trusting Derek. She had left her truck behind that night and went home. Hours later, Derek showed up at her front door. He claimed that his wife had kicked him out and that he had nowhere to go. Crystal, trying to be polite, told him to leave. But he didn't. Instead, he forced his way inside. Within moments, she was tied to her bed, gagged, and subjected to horrific abuse. For years, she had tried to forget about that night. But when the news broke about the Brookhaven Massacre, it all came flooding back. Crystal could barely breathe. "It makes you feel like you're not even human," she later said in an interview. "Like you don't matter. Like you never mattered." She had spent years trying to warn people, and no one listened. Families who had no idea they were in danger. For the parents of the 5 murdered teenagers, the news of Derek Lawson's criminal record was a devastating shock. They had never been told the full truth about who he was. They thought their kids were safe, just having an ordinary sleepover. Nathan Brewer, Emily's father, described Derek as a nice guy. Ashley Reynolds, Brooke's mother, said their families had been close friends since 2020. Stephanie's mother, Janice Hale, said her daughter had been completely deceived. Janice later revealed that Derek controlled Stephanie's every move, dictating where she went, who she talked to, even tracking her kids' cell phones. She had always felt uneasy about Derek. He was quiet, reserved, and distant whenever he was around her. Something never felt right. Then, months before the murders, her husband had been researching a coworker's criminal record when he accidentally stumbled upon Derek's past. When they read what he had done, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The warning that came too late. Janice had tried to warn her daughter. She had begged her to reconsider her marriage. She even thought about going to the police. But by the time she found out the truth, it was already too late. Derek was already planning his final act, and nothing could stop him. It wasn't until after the massacre that the full extent of Derek Lawson's darkness came to light. His past wasn't just a criminal record. It was a carefully buried secret that should have set off every alarm. And yet, somehow, he convinced everyone around him that he was just misunderstood. The manipulation that kept him in control. Months before the tragedy, Stephanie's mother, Janice Hale, and her husband had discovered Derek's criminal past while researching a coworker's background. What they found was horrifying: a history of sexual offenses, abuse, and manipulation. When they confronted Stephanie, she was shocked. But instead of leaving Derek, she asked him for an explanation. And that's when Derek's true manipulation began. According to Janice, Derek hired someone, a lawyer or a so-called advocate, to convince Stephanie that his past charges were just misunderstandings, that he was wrongly accused in 2003, that he had never harmed anyone, and that he was just a man trying to rebuild his life. Despite their warnings, Stephanie stood by Derek, insisting that he had passed a background check. Janice didn't believe it. "I was the most outspoken about him being a registered sex offender," she later said. "And every time we brought it up, Stephanie would shut down. She couldn't talk to her kids. She had to play along just to keep an eye on her grandkids. She felt trapped. And before she could get out, it was too late. A crime scene unlike any other." Days after the Brookhaven Massacre, the victims' families were allowed to enter Derek's home, the place where their loved ones had spent their final hours. What they found inside was something out of a nightmare. Beds equipped with chains and restraints. A kitchen island with a lock and chain attached to it. Disturbing items scattered everywhere: bondage tools, restraining devices, and lubricant bottles. Books on witchcraft, cults, and psychological control. Drug paraphernalia, including what appeared to be drug-laced candy. The filth and disarray suggested that something horrific had been going on for a long time. Investigators collected massive amounts of evidence, including computers, laptops, and hard drives, 9 cell phones, palm and fingerprint samples from Derek's truck, purchase receipts linked to disturbing online orders. Then they found something even more chilling: a notebook. Inside, there was a list of names. One of those names? Every single victim of the massacre. Had Derek been planning this all along? Or worse, had he done this before? An investigation riddled with negligence. As more evidence surfaced, it became painfully clear that law enforcement had overlooked major warning signs. How was Derek allowed to live freely when he violated parole multiple times? Why did police ignore red flags about his obsessive control over Stephanie and her children? How did the family get access to the crime scene before it was fully processed? These failures cost 6 innocent lives. And now, families were left searching for answers. A chilling final message. As the investigation continued, new details emerged about the victims' last moments. One of the most haunting discoveries came from Ashley Reynolds, the mother of 16-year-old Emily. She had been texting with Emily on Saturday night. Then, early Sunday morning, she received a strange message. It was a simple text. Emily saying that she was going to a lake in a nearby town and would be home later. But something about it felt off. Emily was always so thoughtful in her texts, Ashley recalled. She never forgot to say, "I love you." She always checked in before and after things. But that message, it didn't feel like her. Now, Ashley is convinced that Derek sent that text himself. By the time she read it, Emily was already dead. A master manipulator who fooled everyone. Even after the massacre, many of Derek's acquaintances struggled to believe that he had been capable of something so monstrous. Neighbors described him as quiet but friendly. The parents of his stepchildren's friends said they never saw anything strange. Even the victims' families had once trusted him enough to let their children stay over. But in reality, Derek had everyone fooled. He had crafted a false image: a loving husband, a devoted stepfather, a hardworking man. Behind closed doors, he was a predator. And when it all started to fall apart, he made sure no one lived to tell the truth. A father's heartbreak. One of the hardest interviews to watch came from Nathan Brewer, the father of Brooke, 15, one of the murdered teens. He could barely hold back tears as he spoke. "I trusted him. I had no reason not to. We never knew. We never saw it. He had believed that Brooke was safe. Now he was burying his daughter. The pain in his voice was unbearable, and the anger was unmistakable. This should have never happened. He should have never been free. And he was right. Derek Lawson should have never been free. But the system failed. And now, 6 lives were gone forever. For many of the families affected by the Brookhaven Massacre, the grief is unbearable, a pain that will never fully heal. Among the victims was Brooke Reynolds, 15, a bright and ambitious young girl with dreams of becoming a veterinarian or a teacher. She had recently been selected for a local beauty pageant, something she had looked forward to for months. Now, she'll never get the chance to walk that stage. Her father, Nathan Reynolds, spoke through tears, describing Brooke as a fearless, loving, and compassionate daughter who had her whole life ahead of her. And now, it's all gone. A family shattered. For Janice Hale, the tragedy was even worse. She didn't just lose her daughter. She lost 4 family members in a single night. Her daughter Stephanie, her 2 granddaughters Rachel and Madison, and her grandson Nathan were all taken from her in the most unimaginable way. Through her grief, she still had one thing to say. Derek didn't deserve an easy way out. He should have suffered. He should have faced real justice. Derek had robbed them all of their futures. And instead of answering for his crimes, he took the coward's way out. But the real question is, why was he ever free to begin with? A monster in disguise. Even those who knew Derek in prison had spoken out, revealing just how twisted he truly was. James Fleming, a man who shared a cell with Derek in 2015, described him as disturbingly obsessed with sex. It wasn't just an occasional comment, it was constant. If I wasn't strong mentally and physically, I believe he would have tried to molest me. Fleming admitted that when he first met Derek, he thought he was just another inmate, someone trying to move on from a past mistake. But when he learned the full extent of Derek's crimes, everything changed. You don't get a 20-year sentence for something minor. If they gave him that much time, it had to be much worse than what people knew. And now, knowing that 2 of the teenage victims were assaulted before their deaths, it raises a chilling question. Could this have been prevented? How did the system fail? Despite Derek's criminal record, despite his history of manipulation, despite all the red flags, he was still allowed to live freely, even after violating parole. How did law enforcement allow this to happen? Why weren't the warning signs taken seriously? And most importantly, how many other predators are slipping through the cracks right now? This isn't just about one case. It's about a broken system that allowed a known predator to walk free. A system that failed 6 innocent lives. What can we learn from this case? Derek tricked everyone into believing he was a good man. He convinced Stephanie that he was a loving husband. He convinced the children that he was a trustworthy father figure. He convinced friends and neighbors that he was just a quiet, hardworking man. And in the end, no one saw the truth until it was too late. So, here's a question for you. How well do we really know the people around us? Could someone in your life be hiding a dark secret? How do we protect our loved ones from predators who blend into society so easily? These are questions we should all be asking, because cases like this aren't as rare as we'd like to believe. The world is full of monsters hiding in plain sight. That's why it's so important to pay attention to warning signs, trust your instincts, and always dig deeper when something feels off. If there's one lesson to take from this tragedy, it's this. Never assume someone is safe just because they seem normal. Never ignore red flags, no matter how small they seem. And always do your research before trusting someone with your family. Help keep these stories alive. What do you think? Should the justice system be held accountable for allowing Derek to walk free? Could anything have been done differently? How do we prevent this from happening again? Let's start a conversation. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this case eye-opening, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another true crime story. Your support helps us continue sharing these important cases. Like the video if you think these stories need to be heard. Share it to help spread awareness. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and we'll see you in the next one.